I think Palantir Foundry is a Ferrari, Palantir IP is a Ferrari. Like, why would you go for a Fiat Punto? It makes no sense. You want to go fast, right? It's the goal.
Still very early days for Palantir. I think that people who are plugged into the investment scene know more about Palantir than people who are plugged into the software scene.
What I've seen in the field, and it excites me so much, is that Palantir is making big corpo operate like startups again.
If we look historically at the people who were had their heels dug in, I will never adopt this thing because it threatens my job personally or my interest personally, those people have almost always lost.
To say, hey, hold on, like we're about to approve this claim that is literally worth dozens of millions of euros or USD, but it turns out that the AI flagged that we should actually not be covering it because of nitty details in the fine print.
Eventually, you do reach a point in Cursor where you'll get overages, but because they're so heavily subsidized, a lot of the developers aren't reaching those overages, and they're just using this to like write as much code as they can. Quality be damned, whatever. Just get the PR in. Does it pass the test? Let's go, right?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CodeStrap podcast. My name is Connor Deeks, CEO of CodeStrap, and I'm joined, as always, with the original CodeStrap himself and CTO, Dorian Smiley. We're going to be bringing you guys the latest and greatest around Palantir, the tech, the company, the community. We'll also be discussing insights on other companies, things happening in the world of AI, of data, of consulting, of investing, and any meaningful topic that requires attention. The focus of today's episode are the hidden truths about AI that companies must consider on their adoption journeys. We're joined today by Antoine Allard. Antoine is a former tech lead at Palantir and the CEO of 10x Partners, a senior-only consultancy and an official Palantir partner. Throughout their careers, he and his team have delivered more than 50 use cases across 10 industries on the platform. Antoine, welcome to Code & Connor.
Thank you for having me, Connor. And nice to see you.
Welcome. Great to have you, man.
First topic on the docket is geography. So the current state of AI advancement in Europe. Particularly, Antoine, we haven't had anyone from Europe on the pod yet. So what are you seeing? What are you feeling being in the heart of Europe?
I would say the state of AI in Europe is regulated. I have an anecdote for that. I was invited to the AI summit. I think it was in Paris in 2024, right? And there was on the stage two people. There was a former member of European Parliament, and I think the co-founder of Mistral. And Mistral is a very heavy AI player in Europe. And I remember the former member of European Parliament say, I think the role of Europe is to be a referee between the US and China. And it kind of hurts. It hurts to hear that, right, from the audience. And it hurts as well that the co-founder of Mistral is like 2 feet away from the person. So I would say, yeah, the current state of AI in Europe is likely that we are very good at applied AI in regulated industries. So typically healthcare, insurance, I think European people, they really rock here. But we are lagging behind the US when it comes to like the actual model development, or at least that's what I foresee from Europe. I don't know if you guys agree and if you've heard that kind of perspective on Europe before, if it's news to you.
Well, I think what we've talked about internally and with friends over there is even being able to adopt AI, maybe not build the models or have a company that's in that race, but the adoption. So if you're in an industrial manufacturing company in Germany or you're in an insurance company in Switzerland, adopting AI doesn't have the same potential value because you essentially have all this regulation around headcount and hiring practices and maintaining certain individuals that, obviously with efficiency comes the potential for headcount reduction. If you can't ever realize that, the huge value that you don't get to potentially tap into.
Yeah, that's right. It's something that I've seen.
I haven't heard that you guys are behind. I mean, Mistral's doing pretty well. Their mixture of experts models were really kind of impactful when they came out. I think they're still making advancements there. And one of the things we're super bullish on is specialization, and especially in the context of enterprises. I think Cohere is also a company that's focused on specialization. We really see like lots of models working together across an organization that are specialized for particular job functions are probably going to be what wins. And so I wouldn't say that Europe's behind in terms of the foundation, people building foundation models, frontier models, but like I would say it's behind in the adoption, like the application of those models, because of the environment isn't really conducive to something where you'd be like, I'm going to place 1,000 bets as a European company on AI right now. That the environment really isn't, I think, set up for that at this stage.
I think you're right. And you touched upon a a good point as well. There is to say that we've got, I think, good talents as well in Europe. Like people actually can do AI and build AI systems and actually go into like actually building the models themselves. I think we've got great talents here. The only thing is, at some point, it also becomes a problem of capital. I feel like I've got friends who are trying, but not even in the foundational models, but even in like kind of what I call the wrapper companies, the people doing applying AI and AI models. They're trying to raise funds, and as soon as you need more than 5 or 10 million, you gotta go to American private equity, right? You can't. It's very hard to raise in Europe, and yeah, it's just a shame because oh my god, you pulled out some crap, Connor.
Yeah, way to tee me up, Antoine. So this is the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Index report. But if you look at global private investments, well, number one, most of the European countries don't even crack the chart.
Right.
Yeah. But the U.S. dwarfs probably everyone combined, and then multiply that by 2. But like, you'd think you'd have with technology of this scope and size of impact that you'd have a lot more investment. But like if you look at, I just did a quick GPT comparison between the U.S. and Europe, and we can unpack the EU AI Act. You have just by any measure or any way you want to compare the things, it is regulation, security, safety on the Europe side, and on the US, it's none of that. So it's all about innovation on our side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, you're right. I think there is a saying that the US innovates first and then regulates, and the European Union is kind of the other way around, where we regulate first and then we innovate. There's a lot of, I hear a lot of narrative being unfolded that, Europe is picking up, and I believe Europe is picking up. I think we have strong players. I'm thinking of Mistral. I'm thinking of like everything related to specialization as well. Dorian, you got a point here. But yet when looking at the graph here, when I read in the European news, Europe is picking up. Look, Q1 2025, we got like 50% more investment in AI. I'm like, yeah, but relatively to the US or even to China, this is not much. And whenever you want to go to hardware type of projects where you actually need to spin up some GPUs and have computing clusters to train models, it's not 5 million in an early stage round that's going to make the difference with what an OpenAI could be raising, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I agree with the amounts you're talking about too. Like under 5 million, I'm definitely seeing startups get funded, probably in more that $1 to $3 million kind of check size. But above that, you're not really seeing it. And there is, it could be a good thing in the long run. Like a lot of the companies that aren't first movers, when you get these kind of revolutions, can take advantage of the earlier works and infrastructure that get built. And then maybe they come in with novel use cases or applications that are already entering a much more mature market, right? So it's like, I would say like the delayed investment now isn't a death knell or anything to European startups. It is hard if you want to get in the game immediately to be struggling to find the funds in Europe. It's also, what's interesting too is the investment the U.S. is making is benefiting the whole world, in my opinion. Like, and we've seen how like DeepSeek R1 can come in and take some of the foundational tech and apply it in ways to help train their models and accelerate advancement. So I would say like a lot of the investment that's being made in the US, especially at the infrastructure level, like if we were to disaggregate this bar chart and see what is infrastructure versus what is the applied AI space and the software side, it probably be heavily skewed towards infrastructure. That infrastructure is going to go and benefit the whole world down the road. So I would say like, it kind of sucks right now. At the same time, there's a huge amount of opportunity I think you're going to have in the future. I would say like the thing that is most frightening that would delay progress in Europe has more to do with what the EU would do to stifle innovation, or what regulations come in that make it really hard for startups to actually apply this stuff in the real world. Like one of the things I saw in the EU report was they listed education and like vocational training as a high risk category for AI, right? And to me, like cultivating human capital, like that's super important. Like, why would we put barriers and call that a high risk activity in the space of applied AI? It just makes like zero sense. So it's like things like that, where you start to see politicians reaching into categories because they want some sort of influence over them that might severely hinder one of the best categories for AI. I mean, if you look at what OpenAI says about applied AI and other leading, like, education's right up there. It's one of the main ones that they're pointing to.
I agree. And specifically on the education point, plus one as well here. I think that there is plenty of great use case to push. I see so many, like classrooms, and especially maybe in Europe. I don't know if it's the same in the US, by the way, but there is a bit this, or at least in France. I don't want to be biased. But in France, where I grew up, I live in Switzerland now. But in France, there is a bit of this mindset that, like you've got a classroom of 30 people. And then if there are people who are lagging behind, you can adapt the pace of the whole class to those people. I think having just like a personal AI coach to everyone is indeed not a risk. It's like an investment in the future. It's the most beautiful thing you could be doing for like your youth in a sense. I think they flag it as high risk because they're probably, maybe they're scared that, if it's an American AI model being used to train somehow, the French people or the European people, again, don't want to be biased here. It could be a geopolitical risk, maybe.
Our politicians are just as heavily pushing on influence there because they don't want like woke AI models teaching students in the US, right? So like there's definitely that aspect of it. It's an example though of where like if politicians push too hard, innovation stops and the consequences are really bad because it's not only like you're squashing what could be a really beautiful startup space, right? You could have hundreds of companies getting started vying for like improving education, and that has the second and third order consequences of a few of those are going to figure that out. Now we can cultivate human capital in a way we couldn't before, right? And in an environment where things could change really rapidly, let's say if we look to previous industrial revolutions where people who made wagon wheels didn't have a job anymore, people who used to go around and knocking on doors, to wake people up in the morning weren't going to have jobs anymore. If you look at a time where there's high turnover and it's very scary for people losing their jobs, well, man, if you have an education system that lets you reskill faster, it lessens the impact of that, But if you're in an environment where you're not allowing AI to be used and now you can't take advantage, the second order or third order consequence of your policy is that now people can't retrain as fast. Like that puts your economy at risk. And I mean, there's other second and third order consequences around this, but I think that like policymakers should be very careful when they're injecting themselves as to like, don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. That's like one of those things.
Well, and then I'm going to pull up another chart here, but if you look at like where jobs are being created, this is relative to the country. So relative AI hiring as compared to total hiring, and then compared year over year, it's the growth lever for everybody's economy is at least association with AI. So year over year, you're saying, big, relative to the total size of jobs being offered or open available jobs, they're not all, but a huge chunk of them are AI related. So any stifling of this, any restriction to build up the scar tissue and the acumen in this space could be devastating to the countries who do that to themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something, by the way, I see this kind of reticence to adopting AI also in the corporate world. As in, there are a lot of people who are scared that whatever AI use case you create for them, be it with Palantir or another technology, by the way, is going to be stealing their job. And so there is a lot of politics, even like corporate politics, not just public politics, getting into place to sometimes slow down these efforts, but for kind of the wrong reasons. I understand that people are scared of losing their job, but I think Dorian, here as well, you made a point. If you've got an environment where you're allowed to pivot fast, then let's do it, right? Let's innovate. I don't know.
How adaptive your economy is at a time when it's being disrupted, and we're really not there yet. I mean, if we look at the impact of AI, it really hasn't. I'd say, except for a few areas, you have like call centers and customer service. That seems to be something that is being impacted now. I haven't seen too much disruption outside of some of these areas. If we accelerate, I think it becomes more of an issue. So I'd say like right this very moment, it's not a huge deal, but like as more and more of these areas start to get impacted, and especially if the economy is not growing now. So let's just say growth is flat, or where in worst case, you're in a recession and AI is there. Well, the natural lever businesses pull on in a flat or no growth or low, recessionary environment is I'm going to take cost out of my business. And AI is very good at that from that standpoint, because one person with AI can do a lot more work than one person without AI. I mean, it's just a fact. And so like if you're in an environment where growth is flat or it's recessionary, there is this lever the business can pull on to take cost out. Well, you are going to get a high turnover in the jobs. And now you can come in and you could stop that. Like the EU has labor protections, for example. Like, I don't know if you've seen this, but like one of our friends at Merck was telling us that like it's hard for us to apply AI here because there are a lot of laws around protecting jobs, and you're not allowed to fire people because you can, use AI and now 5 people can do what 50 used to do. That's not going to happen. So it makes it harder for them to put that applied AI on the roadmap. But again, we get back to like Europe doesn't operate in a vacuum, and Germany doesn't operate in a vacuum. Like if other countries are making those decisions and bets, and you are in a lower growth environment, and those economies can then start to accelerate down the road. Maybe it takes 10 years for those AI bets to pay off to where costs come down and now we can grow things on the supply side and maybe economic growth accelerates. But you weren't able to do that in Europe for whatever reason that the legislature wouldn't allow. Now you're at a disadvantage globally, right? Like you have this really, really bad impact.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. I think the what you were saying actually, at some point you said like if we're in a recession somehow, maybe like the focus will switch on cutting costs. And one thing that pains me a bit is to say that, like even if we're not in a recession, the culture on this side of the Atlantic is more to be cost centric rather than value centric. You were saying taking bets and investing for a 10-year horizon is not something that a lot of people do here, but some tend to do it and they have the capital to support that. And then they succeed, of course, because we still have talents. We're still, good entrepreneurs here. But yeah, it's just a different environment and different culture. It's a bit, it's a bit of a shame.
Let's flip to Palantir for a bit here. Anecdotally, what we hear around Palantir in Europe is a lot of political discourse around the company, the politics associated with Dr. Karp or Peter Thiel or the secret, or them having worked with the 3-letter agencies in Europe, or in the US, even though they are also working for the agencies in Europe as well. So, I'd love to hear like from someone in Europe what the opinion is, but then also like, is Palantir a growth story in Europe? Is it a growth story about to happen? Is it declining? We can see some numbers in the quarterly earnings and releases, but what are you seeing and what's the sentiment there?
It depends probably a bit on the country. I know for sure that there is a lot of, not hate, but discredit to Palantir in Germany, for instance, more than in other countries, or at least that's what I heard from friends there and through the headlines. There is this association, I think, of Palantir maybe a bit with the, the MAGA movement in a sense in the US, and indeed like 3 letters agency being behind. It pains me, right? Because from what I know, at least Palantir is not stealing people's data. It's not feeding it to the CIA, or at least not more than any cloud provider would be doing. And by pushing this kind of fear-oriented narrative, people are holding Europe back from benefiting from the Ferrari, right? I think Palantir Foundry is a Ferrari. Palantir IP is a Ferrari. Like, why would you go for a Fiat Punto? It makes no sense. You want to go fast, right? It's the goal. So yeah, I think, and in terms of success story for the second part of your question, people don't really know much about Palantir. Like when I go around and I say, hey, I worked for Palantir, I'm a Palantir consultancy, they tend to say, what's Palantir? I don't know if in US, if you would go on the street on the US, for instance, in New York, you go in New York, you ask someone, have you heard of Palantir? Would this person say yes 50% of the time?
No, definitely not. Most people don't know, especially software engineers. If I ask them, who is Palantir? They're like, I don't know. I swear to God. It's still very early days for Palantir. I think that people who are plugged into the investment scene know more about Palantir than people who are plugged into the software scene in the US. So that to give you some idea of the runway they still have. If you look at their customer count, this just says it all. I think they're still under 1,000 customers total, like globally, right? Like if you look at the penetration of Databricks, I think they're in the tens of thousands of customers. Yeah. And a lot of those are small startups and smaller companies, but or maybe it's thousands of customers. I don't know the exact customer counts, but their competitors are in like the mature ones are in the tens of thousands of customers. And it's definitely not like Salesforce where you walk in and you have a conversation and like everyone knows what Salesforce is. Yeah, it's kind of part of the zeitgeist, but like, yeah.
We still get mispronunciations of Palantir, so it's Palantir, things like that. We've talked a number of times too, like how do we solve this issue? Well, one, you have to have more conferences and people going to them. We have the first Palantir conference coming up here in a month. That's like a start of something. Palantir is going down market with their Palantir for Builders program, which provides smaller companies the ability to procure Foundry and AIP. That's another avenue towards growth. But yeah, we are, Dorian and I talk to people that know about Palantir all day, but for every person that we talk to, there's another client or another person inside of a client that knows about Palantir, never even heard of the technology, never heard of the company.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a bit of a bubble, but not necessarily also on the. I mean, I don't know on the financial aspect of things because you were mentioning Databricks, for instance, which has like more clients for sure. I think I don't want to be saying wrong things, but I think they have similar valuation to Palantir Databricks, right? It's like around 100 billion. To be checked. I'm not entirely sure, but people believe in the tool. I think the few, if you know what Palantir is doing, they know that it's going to win. They know that it's going to dominate.
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of Databricks, I did get a private report that showed their revenue was about equal to Palantir. So like they're very similar in terms of according to this private research group, right? Because they're a private company, it's hard. It's like I can't really know for sure. But according to the private research that I received, they're basically equivalent. I think that like with Databricks, what they've done really well is engaged the developer community worldwide. So like the number of people certified in Databricks is massive. Like they publish their search statistics too. And like that's really useful because now you get all these developer advocates, plus there's a large labor pool to pull from. Palantir's making headway in the UK big time. So like they've got the NHS. Now it looks like they've got their defense department over there. That's something like a $750 million deal that they did recently. I think the UK is opening, and a lot of those narratives that they're a spy company, they're this evil company, are sort of collapsing under their own weight. And Palantir, they hasn't traditionally done a great job of combating those lies. Like they generally have the attitude of don't feed the trolls. So they just wouldn't respond whenever these things would happen. They started recently responding, which is the right approach. Like Palmer Luckey talked about this sort of in a weird tangential way, which is like, he said, like, when people attack you reputationally, like you need to respond because if people take those lies and they believe them, they're less likely to work with you. They won't tell you why. They'll make up some excuse, but in the long run, the reputational damage has a real impact on your growth. And so seeing them respond and respond in a good way, right? Like, come talk to us. I have Courtney Bowman over here. He's our head of privacy and civil liberties. He engineered our, protections for civil rights and privacy. And by the way, we don't collect any of your data. Like going out there, but like directly confronting it, I think is smart. And that way it gives the policymakers and the people who want to adopt the platform some cover to be able to point to like, hey, no, this is not correct. And these people over here likely have an agenda if they're just lying, so like the shift in their messaging, I think was really important. And I think that like confronting those things head on is smart. And hopefully it starts to give some leeway to people. I would say that I have heard direct stories of people who get confronted who are Palantir customers in Europe from their employees about this stuff. Like they'll come up and say like, why are we working with this company? They're evil. They're terrible. Look what like Alex Karp just said. I've heard this from people in Europe. So I don't know if you've encountered that or not.
There is more. Yeah, there is tendency to, there is more friction in Europe in the adoption of Palantir, also internally at companies. In general, whenever it comes to adopting Palantir, there is friction usually with the IT department, but for other reasons. But for political reasons across the business, yes, in Europe, I've seen as well that some people tended to be a bit reluctant to working or being associated with Palantir through their employer. Yeah, because of just this bad image that the company still has around here. But I think it's changing. I see indeed the UK is picking up on Palantir more and more, as it's kind of always done. I think France is a very big market for Palantir as well. Maybe the third one. And it keeps on growing. With the new programs that you were talking about, Connor, I think as well that this is attractive to Europe. because again of this cost-centric mindset. If you've got programs where you can slash with the rate, or if you give access to small and medium companies, where we've got a lot of those in Europe, okay, it's great. I think you're going to boost up the amount of clients as Palantir. The revenue per client might not climb up so much, right? But you're gonna be adopted in Europe.
One of the things I'm excited about, like in Europe with Palantir, is like the idea that like, okay, there's all these AI regulations, and maybe that's hindering startups, but like that doesn't preclude enterprises from leveraging AI and data transformations, for example. Like going in and using the capabilities for AIP, for example, to accelerate creating data analytics for the company, that's not prohibited. And that's a massive accelerator. And if you look across the AIP platform, a lot of those things exist. If you were to like go down the list of new tools that a person could use in a job function that don't displace workers at all. Like we're not talking about getting rid of people, but we're talking about giving them a new toolkit that's better than Excel, and they can do their jobs much better. And the company, more importantly, can have like a more fine-grained picture of how their business is operating. So like if you were to take Analytics 1.0, and that's like Power BI and Excel, right? And that gives you sort of a fuzzy picture of what the business looks like. Now you bring in Palantir, and you can actually get a more fine-grained picture, because it's one, you can bring in more data sources. Two, you can actually build operational workflows and start asking and performing interesting experiments. And now you get like a much more fine-grained picture of how the business is operating. That informs leadership to make better capital allocations and bets. And now the business starts functioning better. And none of that, in my mind, like hits up against any of these regs we talked about or any of the things they're looking at. So like there is a really powerful growth story with Palantir. It might just be more of the traditional Foundry use case with AIP as an accelerator to get to the outcome, but I'd be interested to get your thoughts there on.
I've seen in some of our European clients that one pain they have being in the European Union is that some of their own data is also including personal data from their clients or from their employees, and they cannot really process it without obfuscating it before or applying some other techniques. But definitely AIP is just such a way of achieving results fast. I remember one project that we did in the European Union with one insurance company was built in 4 hours. It was leveraging AIP, it was leveraging vision model, neatly integrating into the platform. It was about comparing claim documents with contracts. And it just brought massive savings to the company, because they were able, to say, hey, hold on, like we're about to approve this claim that is literally worth dozens of millions of euros or USD, but it turns out that the AI flagged that we should actually not be covering it because of nitty details in the fine print. This is such a great way of accelerating business value. And I think those companies should be picking up on that. Like you're given some great tools, use them.
Well, are you guys able to broadcast that message? I mean, maybe not with the client name, because some want to keep their competitive advantage secret. Like, are the stories being told outside of just the echo chamber of Palantir partners or ex-Palantirians? Are you able to get the message out that type of thing is happening?
Yeah, but for instance, on LinkedIn, I'm publishing those kind of white label demos, the equivalent of what we did for our clients. I'm like showing what's happening under the hood. I'm showing the Palantir platform. It's being reviewed by Palantir, so all of this is top-notch approved. And yeah, if you're on my LinkedIn, not doing any personal promotion here, right? But you will see 10 minutes demo of such use case, for instance, the smart claims use case I just talked about, or other ones as well. So the message is out, at least from my humble personal network. But I don't know if it's being relayed in mainstream media in Europe that this is something that is available.
Hey guys, this is Connor from the Code and Connor podcast. I hope you're enjoying the episode. I want to make sure you know about the first ever Palantir user conference, FuturOps. It's in Dallas, Texas from October 22nd and 23rd. If you are a Palantir user, a company that invests in Palantir technologies, investors that follow the companies that serve in this ecosystem, or investors that follow Palantir, you absolutely have to be at this event. It's going to be a fun time. We're going to learn a lot. We're going to see amazing applications of the technology, and we'll trade ideas and network. We hope to see you there. We have AIP Con. We now have, what, Dorian, 200 individual clips of major customers talking about their success stories. AIP Con page. thousands of individual demos and people talking, so it's proliferating. Where is AIPCon Europe?
There is. There's an AIPCon Europe, isn't there?
There is an AIPCon. I know you've got to be in New York next month, but come on, we've got our AIPCon in Europe as well. It was a good success. I think one was in the Netherlands. Maybe with maybe there was some in the UK. Educated guess, I'm not sure. But there is quite a lot of activity in the Palantir ecosystem here.
There are major companies, right? We've got Merck, Swiss Re, and the private, or sorry, in the public sector, NHS, right? Like these are big institutions for sure. Yeah.
Big institutions. But for sure, the growth compared to the US and Europe is way slower. I think they're opening up probably a handful of accounts per week in the US, where in Europe it's like one at best, one every 2 weeks maybe. With PFP might be different with like the startup cohorts, the 0 to 1 programs, all of these.
Do you think they can get more traction in the startup community and maybe some of those companies grow to be big companies, or is it going to?
100%. I think they should. What I've seen in the field, and it excites me so much, is that Palantir is making big corpo operate like startups again. I've seen even 65 years old stakeholder, and that's fine, right? But it's just that those people are not necessarily digital natives, and they're presented with Foundry, and 2 days after they built a use case on the platform. It's just insane. Exactly. It breaks the barrier between kind of developer and business users. Now everyone is a developer and everyone is a startup, right? And let's go for it. I think they should be pushing for that. I don't know if they will. And again, here it's a second educated guess, because I think opening up to startups is not necessarily a financial risk, but it's on the financial reports and on financial statements, it's lowering the revenue per account for sure. I don't know if it's the move they want to be doing. I don't know. I would not do it. If I were, Palantir in the current financial market position, I would maybe not be doing it.
I mean, I would disagree with that in the sense that you're not wrong. I mean, like, yeah, that it messes with the financial reporting. I know they're sensitive to that. I think the downside of that is that every major technology platform I can think of over the past 25 years has started in the startup space. And it's the interesting thing about it is that the reason they do that is enterprise accounts are notoriously hard to break into, and they're extremely long sales cycles. The other is that, like, a lot of those startups, if your technology is really a new thing, right, it's an enabler, it's a 0 to 1 kind of enabler. There will be a small cohort of those companies that are tiny that become massive, And you can look at this with AWS, because I was there when AWS launched. I was at a startup that was one of the first companies to ever use, AWS for anything. And I watched the whole journey from then till now. And there were a lot of companies who grew up to be their biggest customers that were in that first cohort of startups. And I think it's just really important for Palantir to recognize that small companies become big ones, and they'll become much bigger companies than anyone in your portfolio potentially. So you always have to balance that idea. And it's also extremely important from the standpoint of having a talent pool. So like making a bet in Europe around, if you coupled it with like, we have this thing in the American Tech Fellowship that Shyam is pushing here in the US to go train people how to use Foundry. Imagine if you could go into Europe and you could create, like, I love this pair programming aspect. Like, Connor is a business person by background. I'm a technical person by background. When we work in Foundry, we can do some amazing things together because he has insights into how companies operate and how businesses function that I don't have, but I can turn a use case into reality relatively quickly. Like, what if in Europe you were like, it's not the American Tech Fellowship model, but it's more this like partner model, and you could go in and create lots of startups around this space. And you're seeing this movement in the venture capital world where, like, I saw this story the other day about a car wash guy. This guy'd been in car wash business for 20 years, right? Not a technical person at all, right? Comes out, launches his own software company for car washes because he knows everything about car washes, right? And like vibe coded the whole thing, whatever. But imagine instead of like the vibe coding aspect, it's like, yeah, you get a person like that knows an industry inside and out, pair him with, a person like yourself that knows Foundry inside and out. And you make that your growth model for Europe. I think you could create a lot of disruption. I think you could create a lot of interesting businesses, in my opinion.
And you iterate fast. That's the thing, because startups need to build fast. Foundry allows you to do that, as you were saying. So pairing it with the right business users, end users, people who know about the pains, I think it's a great way of building value. To To give an anecdote, for instance, I have a license of Palantir at Tax Partners. We're using it. We're running our entire operations on Palantir, and it allows us to scale very fast. Personal success story, but we don't have a single ops person in the company. We started in June. We're already 10 people. We're going to be 30 early next year. And with everything automated on Foundry, we don't have to care for invoicing anymore. We don't have to care for hiring anymore. All of this is automated. So, or lead augmentation, things like this. And we were able to build that again, we started in June. So it's been in 3 months. All the internal tools, house-made.
We're completely aligned there. If you were thinking about, and this is for anyone in the audience, if you were thinking about hiring someone for a role and Foundry is the backbone of your company, just build the automation, build the agent that can do the workflow, because I promise you're going to be able to do it. That stems from accounting all the way to revenue operations, all the way to executive assistants that are helping you send emails.
Yeah, we're building our entire software stack on Foundry to run the business. So like every piece, and it's bespoke. It meets like our exact needs at that exact time for like what we actually need to run the company. And to your point too, there's no DevOps, there's no platform team I need to manage. Coming from that was my job for 15 years, was running platform engineering teams. Like we built the platforms that the product teams used to build product on top of the hyperscaler. That was part of my journey. I was in AWS very early. I had a lot of skills to be able to do that. And so I know what goes into it. Like I know intimately how hard it is to build, ship, deliver, monitor, and maintain software that's built directly on top of a hyperscaler. So like the value prop is super clear there, and it will let small companies compete against big ones and compete against incumbents. I would say I don't know how competitive Europe is in the sense that a startup can compete. I know that when I read the EU regulations, they are trying to encourage, especially these AI startups. I think they're more interested in the people making foundation models to try and compete against the incumbents, but maybe that environment becomes better for startups to mature. But if Palantir could create some momentum there, I think it'd be pretty incredible. But like as far as blockers, at the enterprise level, is cost a big one, or is it like what are you seeing as the blockers when you go to an enterprise customer and they're like, I don't know if I want to adopt this platform, or what are the blockers from your perspective?
Putting the political part aside.
So there is the aspect that end users need to trust the tool, not only the tool itself as in Palantir, but also what you're building on top of it. There is always a bit of IT friction because, typically people, just like you, Dorian, they come with an AWS mindset, but they maybe don't have the same forward-looking mindset paired to it, right? And so they know one thing, it's working well, they have their entire stack running on it, they don't want to change. Fairly understandable as well. And maybe there is a bit of personal fear in that. Am I going to lose my job to some other consultancies, implementation partners, or Palantir or AI? So that's more on the human risk and paired it with politics.
Can you dissect that between IT and the business operations? Is it the same thing, or is IT more like?
It's not the same thing. It's when it comes to convincing business stakeholders of using Palantir, I think the narrative is quite strong and also well received. It's easy to pitch Palantir to someone, you spin up. And actually, I learned to do that when I was at Palantir. One of our very first things that we were learning to do is to just spin up an entire use case in 15 minutes in front of someone, and we build it from scratch, right? And that's convincing business stakeholders. When you're showing that to an IT person, probably the first question that would come to their mind is this scalable? 15 minutes, is this safe? Is the data secure? Why not doing it on AWS? I have 10 DevOps hired already with me. Why would I need 0.5 FTE? And they feel somehow that there is a trap behind, I think. And here as well, understandable.
We see that all the time too. IT's main job is to manage risk. It's there to manage the risk profile for the organization. What is the risk profile? The risk profile is like, I got all these laptops out there. What happens if some idiot download, is subject to a phishing attack and compromises, some system, right? How do I recover from that? And what is our policy? How do we stop phishing attacks? It's all of that, and it goes across the entire enterprise stack. And that's most of their job function, is to ensure that the business doesn't footgun itself, is compliant with regulations, like the company runs, the technology stack runs, right? But that is antithetical. It pushes up against innovation. So if you were like, yeah, but your whole company's running Excel, your entire operations team is out here running in Excel, bro. Yeah, okay, it's secure and not risky, but it doesn't do shit for this company, So I think where we have to create a partnership is to say, hey, how about we disaggregate this innovative function? But if I can prove to you that Palantir will meet all of your risk profile checkboxes, that you can rest easy at night, that anyone working in this platform, the risk profile will be automated, the outcome you're looking for will be automated, and they can go solve their problems with something that's 10 times better than Excel. Could we partner on that? Would that be something to be interested in? But that's where I'm trying to get the mindset from the person you're talking about to shift a little bit. But I don't think, I mean, I haven't been successful. I actually saw Alex Karp one day. I was walking back from AIPCon. He was going for a walk, and I had a couple minutes to talk to him. And he was like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm stuck in this battle between the fucking, CTO or the CIO and the COO and, the CEO. And I cannot seem to make headway here to like bridge these two people together." He assured me they're making progress here, and that there are CTOs and CIOs now that are coming to them and are interested. I think where they need to excel is in this messaging around how they can automate the things that IT cares about inside Foundry, because a lot of people don't know about all these wonderful things they've built in that make all of the things they're building on top of the hyperscalers, whether that's, obfuscating data from ingest to make sure that only people can see specific data, or whether it's making sure row level access permissions are in place, or that their single sign-on roles automatically carry over into the platform and that people are automatically onboarded into the groups they're supposed to be part of. Like, all of those things are there in Foundry. It's just no one knows about it. They just like black box this thing I'm bringing into my org. It's going to destroy all my risk profile.
That is true. I think Palantir is defending themselves with typically what I'm sharing right now. They've, it's public, the trust and security portal. It's usually one of the first things that I send to any IT team for a client we're onboarding with who do not have Foundry yet, is that, and it tends to reassure them first. But I think there is always a bit of an underlying fear that is a bit irrational on losing their job or losing the stack and the tech depth that they've been building on top of it before. And so this ends up never being the main convincing point.
I would say to those people that is very similar. There was a point in the process where companies were migrating to the cloud, where the people who ran the data centers for enterprises were like, "We're not doing this. We're never moving to the cloud. I will never give up my data center." Where are those people today? They're not working at those companies anymore. Now, I don't know if they were right or wrong. Maybe it was better to stay on-prem. I don't know. I'm just saying that when there's a big technology wave, one of the worst positions you can take is the one that like is standing in the way of it, rather than figuring out a way to leverage it and putting it on the roadmap. And if Palantir is as good as we think they are at providing an alternative to the native hyperscaler, that gives the company, it's not, and the good thing about this is it's not either or. Like with the data center, it was kind of either or in a lot of cases. Some companies are required to operate data centers regardless, but like in most cases, it was like, no, we don't need this anymore. We can do this instead. But this Palantir is not a binary decision here. It's actually purely additive to what they're doing in the cloud already. I think it's just giving the business tools that would take them 20 years to build, and the business constantly complaining to them. Like, why is it taking 5 years to get my solution so that I can have this dashboard, so I have visibility into how operations is functioning, So it's like, if they would recognize that this is actually an accelerator to the goals they have long-term on their roadmap, that for business features, features the business cares about, and also isn't going to displace their bets on the hyperscaler as purely like an additive thing that aligns with them, they can build real momentum. But I do think, like, if we look historically at the people who were had their heels dug in, I will never adopt this thing because it threatens my job personally or my interests personally, those people have almost always lost.
Well, and if you look at the growth of Palantir and the capacity constraint we're under on just any Palantir, Foundry, AIP, Gotham, Apollo knowledge, like, can you sit in a room and have an informed conversation? It is a tiny amount of people, and the clients are growing, and not just forward deployed engineering building a solution, but where are the security experts, the DevSecOps experts that can then speak in an informed manner on platform? They could probably make a killing right now if they followed away from maybe the data center analogy and then into the cloud here, into Palantir.
So one of the things we're focused on right now, and I'd be interested to get your takes here, but like we've been focused heavily on AI coding as an accelerator for our company. We have this goal to like build a natural language interface for the global API economy or the web. But to do it, we need AI coding assistance to like, because there's only a couple of us here that are building product. So we have to like massively accelerate. And so we were digging into how all the tools on the market work today, and also just some of the challenges around this. And I think this isn't just relevant to coding. I think it exists everywhere, which is like, one, I need a process whereby the developer skills don't atrophy and they actually continue to develop as software engineers. Like I don't want a situation in which they're just reading code all day. Like there's an asymmetry between reading and writing code that exists, just like in life where watching TV is a more passive activity than reading a book, which is probably a little more passive than writing a paper. So we have to find a way to bridge this gap between the asymmetry between read versus write, and then provide a situation in which we're cultivating human capital, but we're accelerating. And that is just an analogy of like, I think everyone building AI systems is going to have to make this trade-off here, is like, how do we continue to cultivate human capital? But what I learned as I was doing this is that every AI company on the planet that I was looking at is like all of their business models. And I was looking, well, not every AI company on the planet I was looking at AI coding tools specifically. They're all optimized for use, meaning like, their business model works better the more tokens you burn and the more you pay them. It's like, but it's not optimized for an outcome. It's not optimized for like your engineers get better over time, your company accelerates and has more features. It's sustainable, and the metrics that matter, like DORA metrics, go up, right? Like we know what's not in DORA metrics, lines of code. No one optimizes for lines of code because lines of code is a liability. So like these AI companies are heavily optimized for the usage, not an outcome you care about. And I kind of see this also, probably there's a parallel here, but it seems like every AI company that I'm looking at in the AI coding space optimized for token burn. And I'm wondering like, how you're thinking about these problems. And like what's interesting about Palantir is they are an outcomes focused company. They're probably one of the few that really focus on that. But it really feels like AI systems today are optimized for use and not outcome.
Palantir is indeed optimized for outcome, and their business model is, from what I know, more value-based, right, than cost-based. I mean, you pay per usage of everything that you use on the platform for sure, but maybe the licensing fees, I assume, would be different, right, from a client to another. It's probably easier for AI model companies. I'm thinking of OpenAI. I would not know, if not through a kind of forward deployed engineer program where you actually apply AI to the clients, how you could be outcome-based. I see even consulting companies at the moment who engage on clients on AI project, and they take a cut on the revenue that they generate or the cost that they save using AI. It's kind of value share model. I think is a bit trendy those days. For AI model company, I don't know how they could be doing it without a forward deployed engineer model.
No, I disagree. I think like when we looked at the AI coding thing, what we first did was like, in my mind, I'm like, what are the things I'm trying to optimize for when it comes to AI coding? There's the human capital part of it, but then there's the output, the outcomes for the business. And that's like lead time to changes, how many hot fixes am I issuing? Basically, like how good and stable is the code that makes it to production, and how fast can I get new features and code into production and keep it there, right? That's what I'm optimizing for. I think that if you are a smart AI company, what you will do is you'll partner with the companies to figure out the metrics that matter, and then figure out how to measure the movement in those things with the AI system attached. And then you can charge based on the movement and sustaining those metrics above baseline over time.
Well, we do that in business all the time, right? You just mentioned it in front with consultants. What is the value outcome of a solution in supply chain or a solution in collections? But then when we get back to developers and code generation, we suddenly go back to like, let's just use. What's the no outcome definition?
That's a bit my point here. I think if you want anyways with such AI helping with coding, for instance, to derive a share of the value that you bring to the customer, I think you need to have forward deployed engineers. Otherwise, the only thing that you're able to do is automatically retrieve how many tickets were solved using your AI, how many PR were erased, but this has no financial economic impact. Like if you talk to a CFO about, hey, we've closed 17 PR last week. Great. What does it mean in terms of money? And that I think is hardly automatable, if not through like a consultant in a sense, right? Like someone going to the client and understanding the KPIs that matter and applying AI in the right way, like applied AI.
Found it's an advocate role. And I mean, it's also the FDE role in the sense that like Connor does this all the time. Like my job would be to like, oh, I'm going to build the metrics that matter for the coding side and work with the IT side of the house or wherever the engineering function is. But Connor would be sitting with the business owners and figuring out how to align the work we're doing with their initiatives. Like one of the things that MIT study that came out recently said like the headline was 95% of AI, systems are failing in these enterprises or whatever. It actually wasn't true. If you go and dig into this, that 95% of the ways AI was being used weren't aligned with the business outcome that the business cared about. And I think you're right. If you're saying you need an FDE to come in there to bridge that gap, I totally agree. Because that's like what Connor does for us, right? Like, he's literally making sure that anything we're doing on the technology front and these things we're implementing with AI are aligned to an outcome that the business is tracking. And the only way to do that right now that we've seen is to really have a human sit there. And because the hard part is that the KPIs the business care about are actually the result of a lot of complex things working together. It's very difficult to disaggregate like the cash on books you have at the end of the quarter and how the tool we implemented in the engineering team contributed to that. There isn't a straight line in that metric. And so a lot of what we do is attribution and that often becomes an argument within a company. Like Connor is often having to do an advocacy as to the contribution. And there are formal methods in there. A lot of companies don't know what they are. And there are data science methods you can use to try and make a better argument, but nothing's a straight line connection.
Well, I think most of the time people haven't even thought about attribution. They built a business case that says, hey, we're going to make $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $50 million, whatever the number is. We're going to build the tech. And that is the whole linkage between the two. And that just opens up a huge amount of argument, a huge amount of wasted time in business meetings, trying to take credit for what, or even worse, really like fake attribution where you give credit to people who weren't involved in any of the movement of the metric. So you're right. It's never going to be a straight line. It's never going to be non-complex, but thinking about attribution and how you're going to do it and then building that in technically into your solutions provides a clearer picture as to did the metric move and who was responsible, what piece of the technology may have had a part in it.
This kind of value share model I see in Europe is only achievable by people who are private equity backed or VC backed, because as you're saying, first, most of the revenue is delayed until the end of the project, so you don't have cash flow. And even though you reach the end of the project, you will run into customer friction, legal talks, and all of this. If you haven't defined properly what value means or how you attribute it, then you might not perceive your cash at all. And so that also creates a gap in Europe where this very business model of value share is not achievable by young startups who are bootstrapped. It's impossible. You need to be somehow PE-backed to, be on the safe rails.
Yeah, we found that in like value-added pricing models and this idea of attribution. The challenge is there that like Connor can speak to this. He's done this at a large Big Four consultancy, but it's always very, very painful. I think one of the things is companies just don't want to pay. It's like,
well, it's both sides. For the organization, again, maybe startups would be really difficult to do this in. Even more mature companies that are offering something. There's one, I can't remember what this company's called. It's called Variance or something like that. They're really good at this. They're predicated like from the ground up on doing this. They obviously had financial backing to start. Internally, if you're the one offering a service that is focused on value-added pricing, there's a lot of risk there. And large institutions that are bureaucratic in nature, like the Big Four, have an entire risk organization that are hell-bent on de-risking every project. Meaning, if you offer value-added pricing for 50% of the fees, you're going to go through a painstaking process to get that across the line. And then the second problem, like Dorian just mentioned, is let's say you start achieving that number pretty quickly. The customer is suddenly going to go, well, hold on, is there a process or a people change or a leader that's come in and changed the operating model, something else to try and get out of paying that versus, and I get it, like you want the biggest ROI, meaning pay the least amount of money. But that also is, can be poor practice when you're talking about like partnering with a company that's helping you. If that metric goes up, agree on what a reasonable fee is, by the way, don't give away the house. But, you should reward the people that partner with you to build solutions that ultimately move the needle.
How do you deal with such situation in your career, Connor, for instance? Because I guess you've run into such situations where at the end of the project, your team has delivered great work, you've pushed above and beyond, and then the customer is nitpicking on some aspects, saying, no, you haven't delivered that, it's not the results, it's not attributed to you. How can you deal with such a situation?
Well, it's the two parts. Obviously, contractually, if the like, be pretty black and white in your contractual language. If that metric moves in X amount of timeline, then and you completed the work that was in the scope of services, then you're going to get it regardless. There's very little gray area there. But the second is, and this is what can be quite painful for a lot of service providers, is involving the business and internal developers in the journey of building the thing. That obviously might slow you down a little bit. Like, we want to build the shiniest object as quick as possible. But if you're able to have the business be intimately involved, or at least intimately knowledgeable of how you're building things and what you're building, which is right in line with the FDE model, by the way, you have a much smaller barrier, particularly if you quantified and codified the value tracking mechanics. They understand the attribution that you're going to utilize, and then obviously the functionality.
I have one other thing to add to this, though, which is like, be smart when you write your contracts and have the ability to turn it off. Meaning, like, oh, you don't want to pay us? Okay, well, we're going to turn the system off then. And then you get a very different response from the customer if you're allowed to do that, right? Coming from Palantir, I'm surprised you don't know this, because I've seen them negotiate along these lines in the past.
Aggressive negotiate. I mean, yeah, it takes a lot of trust to enter in these kind of agreements, I think.
The whole point of this is we're trying to align incentives, right? The only reason you actually go through the pain of this is you're trying to build a business that aligns on the right incentives, so that you're not optimized. Like, I think AI systems optimized for use are a waste of time. Like, they're not there. They're giving you a bunch of tools, like a bag of hammers, when you want a house, I don't want this bag of hammers. I want this freaking house over here, And so, like, aligning incentives, I think, is the right way to go.
Hey guys, this is Connor from the Code and Connor podcast. I hope you're enjoying the episode. I want to make sure you know about the first ever Palantir user conference, FuturOps. It's in Dallas, Texas from October 22nd and 23rd. If you are a Palantir user, a company that invests in Palantir technologies, investors that follow the companies that serve in this ecosystem, or investors that follow Palantir, you absolutely have to be at this event. It's going to be a fun time. We're going to learn a lot. We're going to see amazing applications of the technology, and we'll trade ideas and network. We hope to see you there.
On this concept of misaligned incentives, though, like, it seems to be permeating the industry and accelerating. And now it's reaching the point where it's like, okay, we've got NVIDIA is now investing $100 billion into OpenAI, who's going to invest $100 billion. Like, we've got this weird web of incentives going around. I would love to get your thoughts on, like, the industry as a whole. Like, we seem to be doing a very bad job of building a sustainable business if incentives are going to be this misaligned. But be interested to get your thoughts on this NVIDIA partnership.
Is it part of a larger program, by the way, in the US? I heard $500 billion invested in AI or something like this. What's the name already of this program that you have in the US?
Oh, they announced it with Sam Altman in the White House. What was it called? Stargate.
That was with SoftBank, I think. He's the original partner, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And then Elon Musk promptly said something along the lines of, they don't have the money. Like, the bank that's backing this doesn't have 500 billion or whatever it was going to be. What was this thing? But it could be part of that initiative. This brings a whole new definition to the term circular economy, but, like, I can't for the life of me, like, it really feels frothy when you start seeing these kind of things, like, and a little scary. Are we at this bubble or top of the market? These tend to be the kind of things you start to see as you reach the death throes and the death rattle of a crazy bubble. But I'd be interested to hear your take on, like, is anyone, like, kind of thinking about this in terms of, like, man, we're just feeding money back into this hype train, or, like, even the concept of, like, the hype train and the bubble talk around AI. Are you seeing anything around that?
Before starting Tax Partners, I had another company which was focusing on bringing deals to investors, right? We were helping them to find startups to invest in. So I've been very close to the topic of the so-called AI bubble. And even, like, end of 2023, investors, at least around me and in Europe, were starting to talk about this kind of AI bubble. We're investing too much money. Anything that has .ai in the domain name is somehow raising $5 billion. And that, to me, right now what's happening between, for instance, OpenAI and NVIDIA, where they invest, I think, progressively up to $100 billion, is Yeah, it's the pinnacle of it. It's a bit, they're all sharing somehow the same blood, and I see some companies that are investing in others where they're providing the hardware that the other is running the software on top of. So it really becomes a real bubble, as in even the investment is self-contained somehow into this big bubble here. What you're sharing here, Connor, was that? Yeah, exactly, right? This is this kind of triangular and sometimes like even more complex figures.
At some point, value has to be created, right? Like at some point in here, we got to create some value, guys. And so, like, otherwise, that whole pyramid, and I love that it's a pyramid. It's just great. It's like that pyramid is going to collapse, right? So it's like it's not like It's almost like at the top of the pyramid, you have like the Oracles and the NVIDIAs and the open, and then maybe below it's the open AIs, and at the bottom of it are all the startups and also they're like, hey, bring in the next startup, bring in the next, and it's like. Dude, and it's like the same companies that are invested at the infrastructure and foundation layer are also investing in all the startups that are supposed to use all these services. But like what we need to start seeing is value creation out the other end. And that's where I'm so obsessed with building an AI company that's focused on outcomes. And if more investors and more people would actually pull on that lever when they're doing the evaluation of the company or the startup or whatever, is like, what is the outcome that you actually hope to enable? And how do you plan to stay focused on that and deliver it?
We'll link this in the video notes, but if you look at Sequoia Capital's assessment of the growth in services and the economic engine that should be being driven by AI, they're quantifying it at like $10 trillion. So maybe that's a little overhyped, but the current market for services in the US is something like 2.5 trillion. So let's say there's some growth in between that. That's where we should be focused on investing in companies versus this bullshit triangle of just like feeding 3 companies that aren't really generating anything.
If I was a VC, I would literally ask this question: what is the outcome you want to enable? Like if the founders of Cursor were sitting in front of me and I'm going to back their company, I'd be like, what is the outcome you hope to enable by building AI coding agents? And if it's like the outcomes, I want to automate coding, or I want to replace the engineer or at least get to a workforce of engineers. Well, that doesn't mean anything. What is the outcome, right? And an outcome might be something like finding the right balance between AI coding assistance, velocity, and sustainability, because we all know the more lines of code you add in the code base, the harder it becomes to add more code. There is the sustainability aspect. So like cultivate human capital, right? I want the engineer to continue to grow. I want a balance between that. I want to solve the read versus write asymmetry problem so I can continue to cultivate that human capital. And I want it to be sustainable, right? So I want companies to be able to find the right balance. Maybe I have to customize that for each company between the velocity increase and software evolution such that this practice will be sustainable. And ultimately, that should help drive GDP growth. That's an outcome. That's a fucking outcome. An outcome is not, I want agents writing code. Why? What does that do? Right? That burns tokens, that's token burn. So like, I think we really need to shift the discussion here when we talk about AI is, do the founders have a clear vision for what this tool, what this system is going to provide the world in terms of a value add that isn't purely this notion of like, I can take a job function and automate it, but that doesn't mean anything.
What pain does it solve? It should be the first question that any entrepreneur asks themselves is, what does it? I think Palantir has been good at sticking with that question.
That's why they're so successful. They have been laser focused on this question. I think if you're in Palantir, like it's very entrepreneurial inside Palantir. What I've seen is people form teams, they go after, specific areas where they can bring value. And if you can't answer this question inside Palantir, you're not doing it, dude. Like if there's no value focus here, like it's just not going to happen at the end of the day. I think they've built a tremendous culture around being outcomes focused, and it's why they're winning where other people are failing.
Connor, you're sharing the Cursor pricing page I see here. I was wondering, even like on the ultra plan, $200 a month, right? The amount of they must be burning cash. I'm pretty sure that even on the ultra, they're not profitable, right?
The cost of this stuff is ballooning, number one, because Dorian wrote that article about partly the code apocalypse we're going to face here, but the token blow, the sheer number of tokens being generated is far outpacing the cost reduction.
Yeah, they subsidize those plans because they don't pay for all the tokens burned. The way they're trying to run the business model is like they figure the vast majority of people who sign up for one of these plans won't exceed the usage. It's kind of like in most cases where you build a platform, you have like some people who are heavy users and there are very few number of them. And then a lot of people, this long tail of users who aren't like power users. So they're betting on this idea that like, they can basically get away with this because the handful of customers that are the power users are being subsidized by the long tail. That hasn't happened yet to my knowledge. It's a private company. This is speculative, but like from what I can observe in the public data is that they are likely paying and using their cash to subsidize the tokens that are being generated on the platform. And that the incumbents, like they're the incumbent, the challengers that are coming in, their strategy is to come in at the right time and just offer a free version or further underwrite this token subsidy game they're playing and then displace Cursor, right? Because the switching costs may not be high. Developers don't care. They're just like trying to get to dates. And developers just don't want to work. The outcome that developers are getting to with Cursors, they're just not working. Or they're like working 2 jobs, or they're, some shitty outcome that is really bad for everyone. And so this game of token subsidization and these eating the cost so that developers can basically sit there and do their entire job function through AI. Because I've watched developers use Cursor, and we went through their, like every prompt they run, we go through how many tokens are generated, right? You can export this as a CSV out of Cursor and you can see how many tokens went into each prompt. And they don't care because they're paying $20 a month. And like they're not in the YOLO necessarily. Sometimes they're focused on trying to get a better prompt in there. But at the end of the day, they can see they're not paying for a fraction of these tokens. And so they're just incentivized to crank as much work through that shit as possible. There's no supply and demand curve there, right? Eventually you do reach a point in Cursor where you'll get overages, but because they're so heavily subsidized, a lot of the developers aren't reaching those overages, and they're just using this to like write as much code as they can. Quality be damned, whatever. Just get the PR in. Does it pass the test? Let's go. And that is unsustainable long term, both for the developer and for the company that uses the tool.
It's a bit of a all-you-can-eat Chinese restaurant type of business model, except that I guess Chinese restaurants are making money out of it. I'm not sure as you're saying. They're making money on the $10 a month.
They don't have VCs giving them $100 million on a made-up valuation because of ARR that's based on, Dr. Karp says this all the time, like these companies that have a bunch of revenue, meaningless if you never actually make a profit, right? And these guys are just burning cash like it.
We that's speculative on our part. We don't have access to it's a private company. We don't have access to their books. Like it's just speculative based on the way I'm projecting this out is I'm looking at the exported CSVs that the developers are showing me when they run prompts and trying to extrapolate that to the average developer. Cause I wouldn't consider these people like Cursor power users necessarily. They're right there. They're not launching a startup on this. They're just in their company trying to automate a lot of their job away. I would put them in the average Cursor developer. And given how, like, I watched 3 prompts in a row generate 1.6 million tokens, 3 million tokens, 3.5 million tokens, and they never even got to an outcome. Like it just says error, and like, and right next to it, it'll say not charged, not charged because, yeah. And dude, to give you an idea, like per million tokens for GPT-5, something like $10 in the output side, So like that's a lot of money, dude. So that's where the speculation is coming from on our part on what they're actually paying. But more importantly, every developer who I've watched do this, one, I think they're not using Cursor to the fullest extent. Like there is a way you can use Cursor where you're actually engaged in the spec design and you're more of a leader of the model. A lot of the developers don't use it that way. So there are ways to use Cursor where you get a much better outcome. But I think at the end of the day, Cursor wasn't built to say like to answer the problems around like sustainability and AI coding. How do I balance complexity growth in the code base with every line of code we add and our ability to maintain it? It's not a question that they're asking, and this is the side effect of Cursor because developers now are spitting out way more features, never mind the quality or whether or not it's aligning with this balance between complexity growth and lines of code. Like that's not being considered. Then there's the other aspect of it, which the developer's not writing enough code. Like they're fucking using tab complete on the code generated by Cursor, and they're not actually thinking anymore. And that's a skills atrophy problem, meaning the talent I have as human capital will be worth less tomorrow than it is today. That's a problem.
True. I've seen people use AI as a way of guiding pull request reviews. Like it's not like the AI is judging the quality of the code. It's just telling the developer how to read and skim through it, what to look at. I think that's great because you can then, maintain a bit of self-thinking, if this is an English term, when you're reviewing a PR. which is not the case of most developers anymore that are being just supercharged too much by those AI.
There are companies selling AI to do the pull request review. At some point, you come back to like, what would you say you do here, Bob? You know?
It's just then you've got like other AI commenting in the pull request raised by an AI, which is going to be merged by an AI.
That's because developers are incentivized because they're employees to not work. If they can collect their salary or multiple salaries, which if they work remote, you have to be conscious of this. Multiple salaries from multiple jobs and not do anything, that's a win for them. And so ultimately, this raises lots of questions about going back to office. This raises lots of questions about like, should we even use these tools because they're not, worried about an outcome? I think enterprises really need to start thinking about this, because right now it's like everyone's pulling on the output lever and the business thinks that's a good thing. And it's like the output lever is not a good thing, especially if your human capital is worth less and your sustainability score is going down. Not ESG sustainability. I'm talking about sustainability of like, with every line of code we add, the harder it becomes to add more code. This is complexity growth. If you're not optimizing for that, and I see this all the time with startups, because startups are not optimized for complexity growth, like balancing it. They're optimized for outcome, right? Like not velocity. We have to get feature. And what I've often seen in startups, about 3 to 5 years, they hit this wall where they can no longer maintain the code base, not because they're not good developers. It's just the amount of complexity in the code has gone beyond the human ability to maintain it without automation, without the right tools. And now AI is accelerating that.
Well, Antoine, let's hear your experience. Like, what do you think? Are you guys using Cursor or tools like it?
It's really close to our culture, and it's part of the name of 10x partners that want to be 10x efficient. And so we're going to be using those kind of tools. It's like when, I guess when calculators were invented, probably people were complaining that people will not be able to do math anymore. Okay, maybe, but, the benefits compared to, you cannot compare. It's just so great to use calculator, and I can still do math even though I'm using a calculator. I see GenAI a bit the same way, except that the code that GenAI generates might be flawed, which a result on the calculator is not. So everything to lead to my answer that 10x Partners right now, whenever we push code to Palantir, we always really try to put some guardrails in place to prevent GenAI hallucination when it's in the loop of pipelines, or code flows when we're just generating code out of external tools like Claude. We use Claude a lot for coding. I think Palantir has those great tools to provide kind of health checks on the output of GenAIs when they're in pipeline. And you've got this test suite that you can run to make sure that no GenAI is hallucinating in critical workflow. But when it comes to helping you out to code properly, it is the same as everywhere else, right? We're not using Cursor ourselves, but we're using Claude, we're using GenAI models. And I have to be honest, it's great because we iterate faster, we push features faster, but sometimes we lose track, even on 2-month project, on the entire code base that's been made, because sometimes there's part of it that GenAI generated, we don't know how it works, but it just works. And how are you going to be refactoring it? I was discussing with those friends who are starting this startup I was talking about, where they reached the same conclusion, and now they want to be pushing an AI that helps you out read through PR the right way, to guide you to read through, to avoid these kind of problems. But we're in a position where I think it's everyone has been spoon-fed code for so long, and it's become so easy to push features that how are you ever gonna roll back to a world where you have to write the code yourself, in a sense?
What I would love to do is show you what we're working on and have you guys test it out. We have a big unicorn from Europe that's going to head-to-head test our AI coding system we built from the ground up for our company against their solution they have for Cursor. Already, the results look really promising because it answers these questions you're bringing up, like how do we have knowledge retention and capture the decisions that were made and the why of the change as much as the how of the change. We sort of built this process where the developer is cultivating a specification before you even get to the code. And then you get a very well-defined set of code that will be generated that fulfills the feature requirements generated in the spec. And then we actually we don't use the model to like overwrite files. We actually use TS Morph to apply a very laser sharp, like focus change set that also gets reviewed before it's applied in the code base. Each one of these artifacts is captured in addition to the entire message history of the chat that the developer is having with the AI, code is generated, PR is opened, all these artifacts are accessible directly in the PR. So the development team can go and read through not only the conversation the developer had with the AI to generate this code, but can see the design specification first that doesn't have code in it. It's literally just like, how do I want this feature to work or this bug fix to work? Then it's the architecture spec that has the pseudocode in it. And then it's the final diff that was, or the edits that were generated for TS Morph. And so you can kind of walk through the whole process that that engineer went through and then preserve it for posterity in the PR so that if I want to go back later and understand how did this code come to be, I have sort of an AI historian that can teach me like, oh, this is why we did this and this is how, and here's the original conversation and here's the artifacts from everything. And so it's like helping the team go back retroactively and answer this question you have about how to refill this knowledge gap, because we're writing so much of this. I need the ability to sort of be taught on demand what happened here and why. It's super useful. And it's what's interesting about it is because we were so methodical in the approach that one, you're getting better knowledge retention for the developer who builds the feature. They also are reviewing like source documentation before the code is generated, but also that we generate way less tokens on the output side. So like our input side's pretty heavy still. We probably have like 30,000 input tokens going into the average feature. But on the output side, it's minuscule. And this really matters because the output side is like, I think it's like 10 to 1 in cost. It's extremely expensive. Yeah. And so like when I do a feature now, I'm spending about 5 cents. And I use GPT-5 Nano, or no, Mini, and Gemini Flash 2.0 is our planner. So like Gemini 2.0 plans how your feature is going to be created. And then GPT-5 Mini does all of the spec writing and code generation. And so it's checking all the boxes for us, but I'll show it to you. But I agree with you that like we need to be able to use calculators. It's a little different in this and that it's a non-deterministic calculator, but also the more equations you run through it and you save the answer, the harder it becomes to then save a new answer in the future. So you have this like pushback that doesn't exist. But also it's important because we still teach kids how to compute like in school, right? Just because there are calculators doesn't mean we stop teaching them how to compute functions. Humans still need to know it. And I think that's also important from the standpoint of a junior developer's growth to a senior software engineer's growth trajectory. We need to like kind of open these floodgates and let them use more AI the more they become capable as engineers. I don't know what the right mix of that is, by the way. I don't know how much juniors should be using this versus seniors. I can give you a parallel in law. Like we know our law firm doesn't want associate lawyers using AI at all because they want them to learn how to become good lawyers. So I think there will be some balance trade-off you make in the journey from junior to senior as well, but we should experiment with this.
I should prevent kids as well from using AI too much because they're optimizing against the grade, and so just too easy, especially in computer science schools, to ask GPT or Claude to generate the code that passes the tests, give you 100 out of 100. I wonder if at some point, just like, and I'd like your opinion on that as well. I know we're almost at time, but you know how we go from abstraction to abstraction. At some point we were using assembly language. Now we're using easy languages like Python. Maybe one day the changelog of the pull request will not even be codes anymore, but the why that you're talking about, and we will not even see code. Right? It's going to be the new assembly that no one sees except some mystical wizards who know how to understand Python. And
I don't think so. I disagree with that because every other solution you're talking about was fully deterministic. Compilers compile what they're given.
Do you think it's going to get to the point where it's
not with current technology? I mean, it's literally a feature of a neural net in that it's non-deterministic. And in fact, the reasons we could have more deterministic LLMs, for example, given the same prompts, you would get the same output. I think the reasons they're non-deterministic have to do with how floating point operations work and the stack size or something.
The inference cluster as well. Like actually, if you run a GPT prompt on the European servers of Microsoft.
But the reason LLMs are non-deterministic is like how floating point operations work with batch size, and you need batch size invariant algorithms if you want deterministic LLMs. But there's problems with that, and like there's a reason we don't do that, which is largely driven by performance and cost and a lot of other things. And so I don't think we're going to get to a point under current technology where you have what you're talking about. And I would also say this, like, encoding human understanding about the world is different than encoding AI understanding about the world. And so the comparison between assembly and JavaScript or assembly and TypeScript or whatever, that doesn't apply because there is actually a fundamental difference. Human understanding of the world doesn't lead to model collapse, So like model collapse is this phenomenon by which if you train an LLM purely on synthetic data and a constant feedback loop, the model eventually collapses to saying like, please, thank you, and hello, you know? So like, I could be facetious, but you know what I mean? Like there is a degradation to the point where the system just collapses. And that's because these models introduce small problems, small, things that are incorrect in the solution. And those things become amplified the more you feed them back into the system. And so getting to a point where AI is writing all of the code, in my opinion, will eventually lead to a point where AI can't write any of the code. So you actually need human input to keep the system on the rails, given how the current technology works. And so like, if we get to a new set of AI models or something else that comes in that can solve this problem, I think you're right. Maybe we do get to a point where no one writes code anymore. Why would I write code? That's just crazy, like assembly. Although there's people out there who still write assembly. It's pretty cool. But like, and I would argue they probably have a better idea about how computers work than most of us. There might be some advantages to that. But I would just say that like, given the current technology, there's this problem of degradation and collapse that exists.
I think even big players such as Yann LeCun, right, from Meta, he's not necessarily extremely bullish on the current systems behind Gen AI. I think it's partially for the same reason as you were quoting, Dorian.
We'll see though. Hey, we'll see.
Or the podcast in 15 years.
Let's go. We'll see.
All right.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks, guys. Today we covered AI in Europe, competitive advantages between countries, AI adoption and investment, the frothiness in the market, including the investment from NVIDIA and OpenAI and Oracle and NVIDIA, AI coding tools and how to use them correctly, and the concerns around using them. Antoine, where can people find you and engage 10x Partners?
Well, go to 10xpartners.com, 10x-partners.com. And you'll find us here on LinkedIn as well. I'm very present. That's basically the only social media I have. So do reach out to me directly here to talk about Palantir, to talk about your needs, your engagements, and everything. I'd be very happy to dedicate some time. My calendar is pretty open in general. Thank you for having me, by the way, Connor, Dorian. Really appreciate the talks.
Thanks for coming. Absolutely. That was awesome, man.
All right, guys. Future episodes coming, more and more guests of partners, customers, content creators, Palantir, other tech companies, Palantir Partners, you name it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.